St. Augustine, Florida, 1957. The air smelled of salt and rust. On the edge of the old town, past the shuttered canneries and the sea-warped docks, a small cottage sat beneath the watch of the lighthouse. It was here that Dr. Edward Harlan unpacked the remains of his former life. A briefcase full of NASA papers, a few slide reels, and a steel lockbox that held the fragment he could not explain. The locals said the sea had coughed it up after a thunderous streak of light passed over the coast one night in June. It embedded itself in the marsh like a bullet in flesh. The government surveyors dismissed it as debris from a failed test launch, but Harlan had run the readings himself. It wasn't from any rocket they'd ever built. It had mass that changed with temperature. It absorbed light without reflection. When exposed to air, it emitted a faint electrical hum, like a wire stripped bare and alive. Harlan told himself he only wanted to study it privately, without bureaucratic noise. But beneath that logic was curiosity, sharpened by obsession. He wanted to know what it was trying to say. He placed it on a folded towel beside his microscope. The fragment was no larger than a man's thumb, shaped like a curved tooth. Dark as wet graphite, it pulsed faintly with heat when touched. That night, while rain pressed against the cottage windows, he heard movement in the walls, a skittering like dry nails dragging across the beams. He blamed rats. When he flicked on the light, the sound stopped. The next morning, he found small burns along the outlet above his desk, black crescents in the plaster. The air smelled faintly metallic. The fragment was warm again, though he hadn't touched it since last night. He started keeping notes on the temperature fluctuations, but every time he recorded the readings, the values shifted before his eyes, as if the object anticipated his attention. By the third week, the locals had stopped coming by. The landlady, Mrs. Dwyer, who had once brought biscuits and gossip from town, began leaving rent envelopes on the porch instead of knocking. She told others the scientist kept strange hours and burned lights long past midnight. The fishermen said they saw flickers inside his cottage like camera flashes. Inside, Harlan barely noticed the world outside anymore. The walls of the cottage had grown restless. Some nights he could hear movement inside them, not scurrying, but crawling, deliberate and slow. The boards flexed faintly as though under pressure. Once he pressed his ear to the drywall and heard a faint electric hum pulsing behind it, in rhythm with his own heartbeat. He ran a wire recorder, hoping to capture it. The tape caught something, not sound, but gaps in sound, moments where the magnetic strip warped as if something invisible had touched it. When he played it back, a low vibration filled the room, too deep for the human throat. He began to dream of black corridors where the walls moved like breathing lungs. Each time he woke to find the fragment glowing faintly red, the towel beneath it smoking. By August, the lighthouse began to flicker. The keeper blamed the storms, but the pattern was too precise. 3 long pulses, too short. A pause, a code, repeating every few minutes. Harlan noticed it one night through the rain and wrote it down. When he cross-referenced the pattern with radio frequencies, he found the same rhythm echoing faintly across several shortwave bands. Not transmitted, resonating as if the source lay beneath the ground itself. The fragment had stopped humming on its own. Instead, it seemed to be listening. He took it to the workbench and placed it beneath a magnifying lamp. Under magnification, its surface wasn't solid at all. It rippled like oil, revealing glimpses of impossible geometry underneath. Something shifted within it, like muscle under translucent skin. When he cut the light, he saw it move on its own. A shadow slid along the desk, separating from the object like smoke escaping from a bottle. It hung there, shapeless at first, then drew itself upward, thin limbs forming, the outline of a head without a face. He froze, eyes wide. The shadow flexed, its edges sharpening. 2 points glinted where eyes should be. Not lights, but voids deeper than the dark around them. Then a mouth tore open in the blackness, wide, serrated, stretching from cheek to cheek. Teeth like wet glass. It hissed without sound, mouth moving faster than any voice could follow. Then, as the lamp's bulb popped and burst, it vanished, folding itself back into the dark corners of the ceiling. When power returned, Harlan's instruments all read nonsense. Temperature, infinite. Radiation, negative. Matter, density, unknown. He didn't sleep for days. The next night, the house began to change. The walls swelled as though breathing. Nails rose from the floorboards. The air itself vibrated with low frequency, shaking dust from the ceiling. He fled outside, but the ground felt soft beneath his boots, the sand moving like muscle. The light from the lighthouse sputtered again, 3 long pulses, 2 short. And then the whole beam turned crimson. He realized it wasn't light at all. It was energy, a transmission reflected by the fragment's presence. From the dunes, something large moved, silhouetted against the glowing tower. Not quite solid, a ripple of smoke shaped like a body, crawling on limbs that bent the wrong way. Its eyes burned white-hot for an instant before fading to void again. It crept toward the cottage, dragging its form along the ground, through the wall, as if the matter between them didn't exist. Inside, the lamps flickered wildly. Tools levitated inches above the table, drawn toward the fragment like iron to a magnet. The object now hovered mid-air, rotating slowly, emanating faint light through veins that ran like circuitry. When the entity's shadow touched the light from the fragment, it convulsed, like a body remembering itself. The dark mass solidified in bursts, revealing glimpses of its true shape. Black flesh with teeth embedded everywhere, arms tapering into wires, a spine made of light. It climbed the wall, inverted itself on the ceiling, and stared down at Harlan with that maw of glass teeth. Then it descended, slowly, impossibly, until its face hovered inches from his. The smell of ozone filled his lungs. He could hear static inside his skull, a whisper in a language that was not made for human tongues. When it spoke, it wasn't sound. It was thought pressed directly into his mind. "You brought me home?" Then it was gone. The fragment dropped to the floor, inert and cold. Days later, the townspeople noticed the lighthouse had stopped working entirely. The Coast Guard sent an inspector. He found the light chamber filled with black residue, like ash that couldn't be washed away. The keeper was missing. So was Dr. Harlan. The cottage door stood open. Inside, the furniture was half melted into the floorboards, the air metallic and dry. The instruments lay fused together. No body, only footprints in the soot, human at first, then long, irregular smears leading toward the crawl space. Beneath the floor, the soil pulsed faintly, as though something vast breathed below. When the sheriff ordered the ground dug up, the men refused after the first few shovelfuls. The sand beneath was black and oily, shot through with thin metallic veins that hummed softly when touched. The sheriff reached down and felt it pulse once, like a heartbeat. That night, power went out across the east side of St. Augustine. Transformers blew with no clear cause. Cattle fled from the pastures near the marsh. Locals began reporting shapes moving through their houses, shadows that didn't match their owners, crawling along ceilings, watching. A fisherman found Harlan's logbook washed up near the pier. The last entry was brief. "It's not from the stars. The stars are just its mirrors. It was buried here long before the sea knew its name. Weeks passed. The government sealed the area, calling it a contamination site. They built fences and posted guards who never lasted more than a few nights. The ground beneath the cottage refused to stay still. It shifted in waves that made the fences lean, as though the land itself was turning in its sleep. One night, a guard vanished mid-shift. His flashlight was found 50 feet from the gate, still burning. The beam shone directly downward, into sand that had hardened like glass, marked with a single set of teeth. After that, the fences came down. The site was quietly erased from maps. Locals stopped saying the name aloud. They said the marsh swallowed it, though the marsh had been dry for years. But those who lived nearby began noticing new sounds under their houses. Faint humming, the click of nails against wood. The kind of noise that stopped when you turned on the light. Some swore they saw something in the fog, a shape clinging to the lighthouse ruins, too large for a man, too thin for an animal. It watched them from the ceiling of the night sky itself, where stars blinked like eyes. And sometimes, when the tide went out far enough, people said you could see the sand glowing faintly red. 3 long pulses, too short, repeating endlessly. A code, a signal, or maybe a heartbeat. Now, on quiet nights when the waves recede and the air feels thick as blood, the soil around St. Augustine still moves. Slow, deliberate, alive. No one digs there anymore. No one dares to. Because something ancient learned to live in the ground. Something that once crossed galaxies now finds home in wood, sand, and wire. And beneath every house along that coast, there is the faint sound of crawling, like nails across plaster or teeth against stone. It waits for another curious mind to listen. It waits to be found again. And when the light blinks red 3 times from the old tower's ruins, it means the ground is breathing. And whatever breathes, there is no longer sleeping.